That's what I'm talking about. Exactly. Yes. Yes. I always find it intriguing that the songs of the 60s are now the hymns of the of our generation, right? But truth is truth. And it shows up over and over in many, many ways. We have been looking this month at this idea of the laws of prosperity. It's put forth by Edwin Gain, who's such a wonderful teacher and has been doing powerful work in the world for a very long time. And so we looked at this idea that the first law is the law of tithing. Everybody survived that. And we got beyond hearing just the word to recognizing that as a spiritual practice, as a recognition of God as the source of our good and as a way to participate in the flow. And so then we looked at this idea of the law of goal setting, that we have these amazing, amazing minds that can direct our activity. If we give our mind an idea or an image or a place to be, it knows how to make that so for us. Isn't that cool? Yes. Isn't that cool? I mean, you can just think, I'm going to go to the store, and you end up at the store. Unless you're like me, every once in a while I end up, someplace else. But, I'm like, oh yeah, I was going to go to the store. But eventually I get there, right? Because we have these powerful things in our mind that say we are like heat-seeking missiles. Once we give the idea, our mind knows how to create it, to make it so. That is so powerful. And what we have to remember, what we always want to recognize, is that no matter what goal we set for ourselves, we begin to create it. And sometimes we don't realize that we are goal setting by our casual conversation. We say silly, silly things like, I'm so broke. And our little heat-seeking missile goes to work to find some way for that experience to become so. Well, I wasn't goal setting, because goal setting is something I do once a year for 5 minutes. And the rest of the year, I just kind of go all over, right? So we want to be clear and intentional about who we want to be in the world, as well as what we want to do and what we want to accomplish, so that our mind can do what it naturally does, and so the universe can operate upon our consciousness. You see, that's how it works. The universe operates upon our consciousness. So the Master Jesus said to us when he was teaching us so many of these things, he said, it is done unto you as you believe. Not you, because you've got it going on, man. I'd rather have it be done as you believe, right? But he's saying, no, you have to join me in this level of consciousness. You have to join me in this level of understanding so that you can create as well. So that's good. And so we're practicing. Some took the challenge to go 21 days without complaining or whining. I made it 21 seconds, and then I had to start over again and remind myself of the goal. But, it's a process. And so today we get to look at this wonderful idea of the law of forgiveness, about learning how to forgive, practicing forgiveness, learning what that means. So it would appear, as a student of Jesus, as a student of the Bible, it would appear to me that this was important, because he talked about it a lot, that we must learn to forgive. There's a wonderful passage, in the first parable. If you ever have studied parables, there's brilliance in them, and of course you have to be able to interpret them and understand what they're saying. But in the very first parable, says 2 people owed money to a certain money lender. I'm going to use dollars just because it's easier to keep track, because most of us don't have our denarii calculator with us. So he says 2 people owed money to a certain money lender. One owed him $500 and the other $50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back. So he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? And Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. So understand that the first parable is the entry into understanding what comes after that. And what I believe Jesus was saying to us, and there's a wonderful book by Todd Michael, The Hidden Parables, if you ever want to study this, he's quite brilliant. Talks about this idea that the first parable, therefore, initiates us into everything else. That it is the narrow gate through which we must enter in to understand the rest of it. And so he says at the core of that, the most important quality that a parable selects is it winnows us out. It's like, when you do that first round of interviews, and not everybody gets to go on to the second one, because he's saying to us that because humility and the ability to forgive freely are really the two faces of the same coin. Basically, the teacher is saying this, that if you cannot be under sufficient control of your ego, if you cannot be modest, respectful, humble enough, I won't be able to work with you on learning the rest of the system quite yet. You see, true learning comes when we are humble enough to recognize we don't know. Yep. We don't understand. I was talking with somebody about some graduates. They had sat on a panel for some ministerial graduates, and they were coming out of school, and they'd just been in this intense training, and they knew everything. I said, oh, how I long for the days when I knew everything. I never knew as much about ministry as the day I graduated, right? And then everything that I thought to be true gets to be examined and re-experienced, right? It's in our place where we think we know, we think we're right, we feel justified, we feel whatever we feel because that's the way it is, that we become rigid, and in being rigid, we stop the flow of life. That's right. Right? The Course in Miracles has that famous line that says to us, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? Right? I always have to think about it. I like to think I'd like to be happy, but I'm just so good at being right. I mean, because when you're really right, I always like to say, everybody has an opinion, I hold truth. Right? So then we say, well, what if I was wrong? What if what I believe to be so is not so? What becomes possible then? What if life isn't hard? What if all men aren't whatever? Right? What if those things that we speak as if they are true weren't true? What becomes possible for us? And we open ourselves to a new way of being, but it starts with humility. And you see, this is this interesting thing, because I think over the years, humility has been taught inappropriately. I'll just say it that way. That it doesn't mean you are worthless. You're not a worm of the earth. You're not an original sinner, or, some of us had to develop our sinning over time, right? It's just error. That's all that means. It's just error, right? But it's not that we're worthless. It's that we are very worthful. But the ego sometimes takes over. You see, one of the things some of us are learning, even in doing affirmations, even in speaking affirmative prayer, that we have to be affirmative, we have to be powerful, we have to claim the truth for ourselves, that I am loving, I am lovable, I am abundant, I am whole, I am perfect, I am complete. And some of us have that little voice in our back mind going, well, don't be arrogant. Don't go first in line. Right, women? Just throwing it out there. Oh, you go ahead. Right? There's this wonderful thing about being powerful and yet still being humble. You see, Jesus to me represents the ultimate in humility and spiritual power. That he was able to stand in that place that said, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. If you have seen me, you have seen the power. If you experience me, you experience the power. And greater works than these, you will also do.
That's right.
See, it was not, hey, look at me, I'm the Messiah. Right? And you'll notice he never said, worship me. He said, follow me. To be a disciple is to follow a way. So for those of us that see Jesus as the great example, not the great exception, but the great example of the full life, we could learn much in this understanding. So he taught us over and over that we need to love God. We need to love our neighbors as ourself. So any lawyers in the room? You might want to look, right? Okay, there's some fine print here I need to look at. If I love my neighbor the way I love myself, are we going to be good neighbors? You might look at it this way. If I talk to the neighbor the way I talk to myself, how's that going to go? What are you, such an idiot? I can't believe you did that again. All of a sudden it's like, oh, building a taller fence, right? But so inherent in that statement is we must learn to love ourselves from that place of unconditional love, to see our inherent divinity, and therefore see that divinity in all people. And when we don't, here's what I've discovered, is that so often people in life show up for me in a way that is either a reflection of my divine magnificence or of my unhealed past. You notice that? That when there's a place that is unhealed within us, boy, do we spot it in others. You're so judgmental. As I like to say, don't you just hate judgmental people? Right? Glad I'm not one. Right? We see that in others more often in that which we don't want to look at in ourselves. And we think that if they would change, then my unresolvedness would also change. It doesn't. Just telling you that if everything was different, if these people would be different, if they'd start being, smart and enlightened like me, then everything would be fine. So I always, when something triggers me, it's an opportunity for me to look at, okay, I'm not just saying I make people's behavior appropriate. There's a difference. But if it's triggering me, it's triggering me. That make sense? That's me that's reacting this way. So what do I need to learn? How do I need to grow? How do I need to be more forgiving, more loving, more gracious? There's this great line that is repeated time and time again, but it's just so good because it's like unforgiveness is like eating poison waiting for someone else to die. Right? But boy, if I just remain unforgiving for long enough, you'll get it. Today would have been my dad's 87th birthday. He left the planet about 9 years ago, and we had a rich relationship, challenging. I don't feel like we ever got to that place that either of us really wanted to be. And I think it was part of our cosmic destiny. But I had some issues. And because I needed somebody to blame, he was a likely candidate. And so, I blamed him for the problems going on in our family and blah, 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 right? He was my scapegoat. And one point I looked around and I realized he's playing golf. He's having fun. He's enjoying his life. I mean, how unforgiving do you have to get before he stops playing golf? And so I began to realize that maybe I was the one that needed to do the work. And we eventually came to a place and we really had some, we got to talk about it. I just said, in the end, I'm so grateful you're my dad. I realize you have done the best you can. I've done the best I can. And I'm grateful for all that you've taught me. You see, my unforgiveness was not causing him problems, but it was causing great problems for me. Jesus taught us this way. In Matthew 5, he says something brilliant. I want you to hear this. He says, so if you are offering your gift at the altar, some translations say, if you go to the altar to pray, and there you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go first be reconciled with your brother or sister, and then come and offer your prayer. Then come and offer your gift. You see, the process of forgiveness, real forgiveness, is arguably the single most powerful thing that we can do for ourselves. You see, if we go, again, symbolically, how would you teach this? If you go to the altar to pray, and you're praying, he's saying, if you're not resolved in your heart, go get resolved, so that your Father, the power, might hear you and bless you. It is a truth that we can never fully experience that which we would withhold from another. We don't get to experience peace fully while we're being unpeaceful towards others. We don't get to experience the fullness of life when we would rather withhold it from another. So in his way of saying this is, do your own work. You see, when we remove those blockages to our greater good, it is then that the universe can move through us. Edwin Gaines talks about this. This is why this lesson, the law of forgiveness, becomes so critical, because we're saying to the universe, bring me greater joy. Bring me greater love. Bring me greater abundance. Let me experience the kingdom of heaven now. And the law says, I would love to. Would love to. It's kind of like the lake or the reservoir behind the dam. Like, bring the water. Water's here. Bring the water. How about if I do it this way? Bring the water, right? And you're like, open the dam. It's not about the water. It's the thing that is blocking. So forgiveness ultimately is recognizing, realizing that we are creating a barrier to our good when we withhold it from another. Now, so Jesus said, if you're at the altar, so if you're going into prayer and you realize, I'm not at peace, then go to do the work about the peace. I'm just going to give you a tip. I'm going to throw this one, no extra charge. Always pray for your own consciousness first. Just do that. Just get that out of the way, right? So that we might truly serve others. Look at what it is within us and realize that all forgiveness starts with ourselves. It all starts with ourselves, right? That we have to be willing to recognize that the way we learn is by doing things right and doing things wrong. And so when we do things wrong, we clean it up. And we try and learn how to do it right. The 12 Steps has a wonderful step in the program. I've been privileged to be the counselor for many of when people need to declare their unskilled behavior. And then they take a moral inventory and they say, I really messed up. You see, one of the things we want to do sometimes is we want to cover it all up with flowery language and pretty stuff. Right? I'm not miserable inside because look at all the nice stuff around me. You see, the ego will always use form as its justification. So when we think about when we get very egoic, we think that our resume defines who we are. We think what we've accomplished in life defines who we are. We think that the bigger house, the bigger car, that whatever makes us okay. You're still a schlub. You just have nicer stuff. Right? It's about resolving that which is within us because you're divine by birth. You got the whole package. and then we forget. And we think that somehow the kingdom of heaven, the spiritual dimension, is somehow separate from us. When it's here. She said, neither low here or low there, but the kingdom of heaven is within. The spiritual dimension is within us. It exists. It's not something we need to get. It's not something we need to attract. It's something we need to allow to be expressed through us. It's so easy. And it takes practice. So Jesus said, you might want to try this. And somebody said, well, how many times am I going to do this? I know how many classes have we sat in where people are, well, how many of these affirmations exactly do I have to do before it happens? Well, you just do it until it becomes your belief, and then it just happens naturally, right? Once you believe you're an abundant person, then all of a sudden abundance starts showing up. And he said, well, here I'm going to tell you, not 7, but 70 times 7 a day, which is 490, which means just stay in a state of forgiveness, right? Just stay in a state of forgiveness. Just stay open, stay loving. Now, hear me when I say this, because here's where people get confused. They think that if we forgive somebody, we condone their behavior, right? And nothing could be further from the truth. We can deal with people's behavior, with their unskilled behavior, even as we love them as a child of God. Right? And sometimes we have to set boundaries. Sometimes we even have to remove people from our lives if they're toxic. And yet we can still love them as a child of God. Yeah, that's right. Right? So Jesus was teaching us this. He was saying, if you're unresolved in your heart, then there's no sense in going to the temple. In other words, to go to that state to pray, he's saying, get clear, get clean, get right. And then you're a powerful vessel. Mahatma Gandhi once talked to a woman, and she said, she came to him and she said, I'd like for you to talk to my son. He eats too much sugar. And I want you to talk to him. You're a spiritually enlightened person. I want you to talk to him and tell him not to eat so much sugar. And he said, okay, bring him back in a week. And he came back in a week. He said, son, stop eating sugar. The woman said, why didn't you tell him that last week while we were here? And he said, because last week I ate sugar. Right? He had to stop eating sugar before he could invite someone else to do the same. You know, I realize this from time to time. You know what? If I'm going to keep preaching about this, I might have to start practicing. So annoying, right? I might actually have to live my life in such a way that you would want to hear what I have to say, right? You see, when our ego gets triggered, there's 5 primary threats to us. It's our ego or self-esteem. It's our physical body. It's our relations with opposite or same-sex, in some case, people, our security, our finances. And that's where we move into fear, around one of those areas, right? And so fear says, oh, I'm separate from God. I've got to handle this. The ego says, okay, I know what to do. Take control, right? But that humility says, there is a part of me that can never be diminished, can never be destroyed, can never be hurt in any way. That spiritual essence of who I am is always whole, perfect, and complete. And so as I tap that, and I forgive, I choose love, I choose to love myself no matter what, as I choose to unconditionally love others, even when I'm recognizing their behavior, then I can move into that place where I'm no longer threatened. Again, Course in Miracles talks about you're either in love or you're in fear, right? And so moving back to that loving place, all forgiveness is choosing love over all other options. Giving forth love. Sometimes it's a painful and messy process, and I would invite you to get messy. You'll stop crying, right? To journal it, to speak it, to move it out of our self to release that so that we come to a place of emptiness, of wholeness, so we can truly be powerful because the Father within, the power within, does the work. I was reminded of a passage. I heard it first from Michael Beckwith, but I think he was quoting Gandhi, and I don't know who Gandhi was quoting. We all just spread these things around, who knows the original. But he said something about, the master of nonviolence, and he said, it's just as violent to take offense as it is to give offense. Yeah, that one took me a year or so to sit with, right? That it's just as violent to take offense as it is to give offense. It's just as violent to assume something about somebody that may or may not be true. Again, I come back to when I'm triggered. Something within my consciousness is responding. A little food for thought there. I realize I become powerful in life when I'm willing to look at how did I participate in whatever happened. What did I do? There's a phrase I use a lot, to create, to promote, or to allow this experience. And then I can look at my own part. Again, looking at my dad and going, Dad was just being dad. He was being the dad he knew how to be. He provided. Men of his generation provided. That's what they did. I wanted Ward Cleaver. Right? He was not a Ward Cleaver guy, Still good, right? But the work was for me. And when I did the work, then we could move into the next level of relationship. You see, time and time again, if we are willing to accept responsibility for being powerful, spiritual beings who have the whole disposal of the universe at our back, we can direct this universal power through the thoughts we think, through the choices we make, through the way we speak and act and show up in the world. Then the rest takes care of itself. So what feels unresolved? What is that thing that maybe even after all these years you're holding on to? Maybe you're 51-49 on right and happiness with it. But maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to say, I let that go. Bring to mind, or to the situation to mind, and we say, I forgive you. I release you. I set you free. And I forgive myself. I release myself. And I set myself free. That we might walk through this world unencumbered. That we might truly experience that spiritual truth and reality. You are, right now, a divine being. So let us awaken to the truth of who we are. Let us release that which no longer serves us. And let us claim for ourselves the divine glory, that spiritual consciousness, that kingdom of heaven, as Jesus referred to it, right here, right now. Let us pray. As we simply sense into the energy in this room right now, into the awareness of the divine presence all around us and indeed within us. And as we reconnect and remember this truth, as Jesus said, the Father and I are one, I like to say this power, this presence and I are one. And I know this to be true for each of us gathered here. There can be no separation from the divine except in our own mind. And so in this moment, we fully open our hearts to the presence of unconditional love. We fully open our minds to the presence of divine love and infinite wisdom. We open the very portal of our soul to remember. The Bible says, "Do you not know that you are God's?" We are powerful. And so we choose to remain humble. Even in being powerful, we realize we're no powerful or less powerful than anyone else. That we are all one. And so as we are choosing to do our inner work, not only are we blessing ourselves, we are blessing all around us. We speak each Sunday of knowing a planet at peace and a world that works for all. And so we start within our own hearts and minds to be that place through which the divine can realize itself more fully. We gently, lovingly release that which no longer serves us. We choose to forgive freely. We choose to give graciously and receive abundantly. We choose to experience wholeness at every level of being. We choose to be powerful spiritual beings right here and right now, and it is so. Amen.